this presentation. It's called Cash Flow Discipline, and it's brought to you today by the North Metro Denver Small Business Development Center. My name is Adrian Hovey. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator here, and I am pleased to welcome one of our consultants, Adrian Hovey, who's going to be giving our talk today. Just a couple technical notes for you. We have muted your microphones and turned off your cameras for this presentation so that it will stream as smoothly as possible. But this is an interactive presentation, and we encourage you to type in your questions at any time. Go ahead and find the chat box or find the question panel. If you're using a laptop, computer, or something like this, then it's going to be on the right side of your screen where it's the GoToWebinar control panel. If you're on a mobile phone or a smartphone, then you might have to find that question feature or the chat feature at the bottom of your screen there. But type in those questions and we'll be more than happy to answer those. And yeah, hopefully this presentation will get you all that you need to establish some good habits and discipline for your cash flow. One other thing I'd like to mention is, at the North Metro Denver Small Business Development Center, if you haven't heard of us before, this is your first exposure. What we do is we support and grow small businesses, existing and new. We do that with one-on-one consulting. You can make an appointment for free with any of our consultants at northmetrosbdc.com. You can also see a calendar of all of our upcoming presentations and programming as well. All right, with that out of the way, welcome, Adrian. What are we talking about today?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for the intro, John. We're talking about cash flow discipline today. That's what we're going to talk about. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the sunshine, getting out a little bit, maybe seeing some light at the end of the tunnel through the COVID thing. So a lot of optimism in the air. I want to make this as valuable to you guys as possible. So I've got some topics I want to cover here clearly, but like John said, weigh in, right? Ask a question. I'll pause frequently to see what you guys want to talk more about, to make it, as resonant with your particular situation as we can. So really, just from an overarching standpoint, the purpose of today, I'm calling this seminar Cash Flow Discipline, but we're talking about, hey, how do we become better planners, right? How do we approach these topics with discipline and methodology? And I want to give you some actionable tools you can take back to your business and start making an immediate impact. So that's what we're trying to do today. And we're going to talk across 4 different domains, right? Forecasting, budgeting, cash flow, and then tying it all together with a methodology. So with that said, let's go ahead and start with the topic of forecasting. And basically we're starting here and not with cash flow because this is a critical component, right? And why, why do we want to forecast? Why do we care, right? It's about making a foundation of a plan. So the foundation of a good plan is the ability to make educated guesses, right? And we know this is difficult in COVID. We know this is difficult. Just really nobody has a crystal ball. We can't predict the future, but we want to start somewhere. And when you're writing a business plan before you're in operation, you want to speculate and you want to try to see, hey, what's going to happen to my business this year? And that kind of creates the baseline, as it were, right? That's how you measure progress. So when you forecast sales or you forecast inventory, those type of things, you're giving yourself something to anchor around. And the reality may be that you're above that in sales or you're below that. That's life and that happens. But at least you have an anchor point with which you can kind of evaluate, right? And you may have heard us mention this over here at SBDC before, but we're big fans of setting SMART goals in a business, right? So when you're talking about a forecast, you want to be thinking about things smartly, right? And that's the specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-based. So when I set goals for my business, I'm looking forward in a year and say, hey, these are the things I want to happen. And I don't say things like, I want to have, a bigger business, right? That's not a good answer. I want to have X million dollars in revenue. That's what we're looking for with SMART, because I can get there. I can say, well, I only got Y in revenue. That I didn't meet my goal or I exceeded my goal. Does that make sense? I'm going to pause there, let that concept sink in for a second.
I think it makes a lot of sense, and one thing that I hear sometimes is people almost throwing their hands up and saying, well, what's the point of forecasting if I don't know what's going to come true? Or if my numbers are all over the place. But it's a little like weather forecasting. We live in the Front Range, and they say if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. Everybody knows that joke.
Right.
The idea is if you've got a forecast and a baseline that you've at least started from, or if you've checked the weather, well, then you'll know to at least bring an umbrella or bring your sunscreen. Maybe it turns out you don't need it, but you have a starting point to work from, and you're not completely caught unawares. And
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, it's about demystifying things that are happening in your business, right? If you take a shot in the dark or a best guess scenario about, hey, how is my first quarter going to look? Or I guess we're out of the first quarter. How's my second quarter going to look? And if you've got a good business plan that says I need to have $100,000 in revenue in my second quarter, well, if you're 1 month into that and you have $30,000 in revenue, you're more or less on track, right? You're a little bit behind, but at least you can see, hey, that was a good forecast. That's a sustainable number for me. I'm doing well. So that's kind of, we're not going to peel back layers here and get into statements or anything, but that's kind of the concept behind this is how do I forecast? And I don't know how many of you are out there in manufacturing businesses, but one of the big things that comes up in there are forecasting costs, right? Labor and materials. And so depending on the complexity of your business, you have to also forecast those types of things based on your planned sales. And it's important for cash flow because as we're about to talk about, cash flow is money in and money out, right? Not revenue in, not bills you have to pay. It's actual cash coming in, coming out. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So the other concept I want to introduce here is pent-up demand, right? So we're getting out of the COVID methodology now, and we're into a new kind of I'm not going to say new normal, I'm not going to say it, but we're past last year, so now things are going to change a little bit, and this concept of pent-up demand is out there, right? If you're in the hospitality industry, I think people are just itching to get back into it and start living their lives normally again. So there's a concept, you need to be prepared potentially for some pent-up demand, right? And that's going to require you to alter your forecast and take a look at supply and ask yourself and your business partners, do I have enough supply to meet this pent-up demand? Am I prepared? And all those things, right? And then finally, when you're talking about forecasting, depending on your industry, there's also a seasonality component you may or may not be familiar with, right? Everybody knows that November is a huge month in retail. It's a huge month in retail because we're all buying Christmas gifts, right? The retail has a very heavily seasonal dependency on November and December, right? So you may not see sales all year at the level of November. So a lot of retail businesses don't achieve profitability until the end of the year, right? And all of your businesses will have their own seasonality curve, right? If you own a bar or a restaurant, you may see things slow down in the wintertime and pick up in the summertime. But the point is, when you're making forecasts, when you're talking about growth, you need to understand which months are going to grow, which months do you have to prepare for, and where is that seasonality going to affect your revenue and cash flow streams. That's kind of an interesting concept. I'm going to pause there. Anybody have any questions or comments they want to talk about with regard to seasonality?
We do have a question.
Let's have it.
All right. Olga asks, what percentage of contingency is common for a manufacturing company considering materials price raising continuously?
Complex question. Not sure I have the answer on this webinar. I know John Jaggers is a consultant who has a lot of experience with manufacturing. I'm going to maybe loop him into this question because honestly, I don't know. Without having looked into your particular business, it's hard to say. So what I would encourage you to do now, in pursuit of answering this question, is look back historically and see where things have fallen in your business right now, and try to establish a baseline. And then we can go from there. So Olga, let's pick this up offline. Good question. Need a little bit more details to be able to answer it effectively for you. Okay. Anything else we can knock out?
That's the one I'm seeing right there. But thank you for the questions.
Okay.
Keep them coming in.
Yep.
And Adrian, maybe before we get off of this forecasting, this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Tell me if you like this one. It's a two-parter. It says, always put yourself in a position to be lucky. And then the second part is never put yourself in a position where you have to be lucky. And I kind of like that, you know, it's like we're making our forecast here. Pent up demand, for example, like if it exists, nobody knows for sure if it's going to be part of your particular business forecast. But if it exists, you want to be positioned to take advantage of it. You know, you could get real lucky and experience some real growth. So you do want to be prepared for it. Just don't be exposed so much that, you know, you need that pent up demand to survive, for example.
100%. And when you're doing forecasting from the planning side, I always tell people to write 3 scenarios into their plan: what they expect to happen, and then what a worst case scenario might look like, and then what a best case scenario might look like, right? And if you've already done the work for the expected case, right? So it's really just a matter of applying a factor of, say, 10% on top of that and 10% below that, or whatever is appropriate for your business. But having some concept of what could a good year look like? What could a good year do to my business, right? So when I'm talking about cash flow, like John said, if you want to be in a position to be lucky, can you service another 10% on top of what you're doing now? Is that even possible? And that does a couple of things. Like it allows you to be prepared for that. It helps you understand the scope of opportunity, and it helps you understand the opportunity cost of missing out on something, but also overcommitting. So highly valuable, easy to do if you've already done the work of a forecast. It's just a matter of looking at something above and something below. Okay. All right. So we're forecasting.
Desiree, I like this. She's pushing back a little bit. She says, "Woman makes her own luck."
Right. You got to make your own luck. Wasn't that make our own luck? I feel like, I don't know if it was Thomas Edison or somebody said something like that. I don't know. Good quote though. I like it. Yeah. Good for
Harder
you.
I work, the luckier I get. I think it's Thomas.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about budget now, because forecasting and budgeting, you know, they're dovetail right into each other, and they're very important, right? So what is a budget? It's a list of your expenses, right? And as a business owner, you need to have a pretty good handle on your expenses. And when we're talking about budgeting in a generic term, it's related to forecasting, because if you say you're going to need $10,000 for May, and then May comes and goes, and you actually spent $15,000, then there's a mismatch between what you're actually forecasting and budgeting for and what's really happening. So you need to have these tools in place so that you can evaluate what is happening in your business. And when you're in the planning phase, I encourage people to do this for the first 2 years. Literally look at every month of your business, what you think it's going to cost you every 2 years, accounting for growth and all those things. And then as you're operating, I think it's more customary to kind of dial that back into the quarterly budgeting, you know, type of thing. Some businesses will budget for a year in December, right? They'll write the budgets and allocate money, and then have those periodic meetings in that year to discuss, hey, are we on budget or not on budget, right? So all of you, I think, understand this, but I can't stress enough that the budget in conjunction with the forecasting, that's really the foundation of your business's financial plan, and it's the foundation for you to understand cash flow, right? You got to understand what it costs to run your business. So I'm going to pause there. I imagine there's some budgeting questions, so let's take a minute and kind of address any of those if they're out there. Wow, you guys are too kind, very gentle on me today, except Olga. I still owe you a good answer, but okay. So when you're doing the budgeting thing, it's important that we mentioned this before. I mentioned this before about the difference between cash flow and a budget. And a budget talks about expenses, and then when you get into your P&L and your actual financial sheets, there's manipulation that goes on there that is not related to cash flow. And cash flow, the classic example would be if you're a manufacturer and you're on payment terms, right? You're getting stuff in, but you're not paying for it for a while, so you don't immediately have a cash hit to your business, right? But if you're paying rent, most of the time you have to pay rent that month, so that's an immediate hit to your cash flow. So you need to understand where the actual cash is coming in and going out, because if you're in one of those longer revenue cycle businesses, you may not recognize revenue for several months before the expense hits your actual business. So that's why putting together the forecast, putting together cash flow, it helps you understand money coming in and out. So in an elementary sort of example, let's just take a guy, Carl, his paycheck is $2,000 a month. His expenses are $1,500 that month. So what's his cash flow? Anybody? Bueller? He's cash flow positive $500, right? Because he earned $2,000, so $2,000 came in as cash. He spent $1,500 as cash, so he's cash flow positive to the tune of $500. So his business of life, right? His life is generating cash that he can use for anything. He can reinvest it into his lifestyle and go out and have a nice dinner or two, right? Really nice dinner or two. He can save it. He can do whatever he wants, but the point is he has cash. Now, if we reverse this example and say his paycheck was $1,500 and his expenses were $2,000, he has negative $500 cash flow, right? It's very simple, elegant example here, but you can see right away that if he's got negative $500, that's unsustainable, right? That cash has to come from somewhere, and that's why they say cash is king, and cash is so important to your business, because you have to have it to pay those immediate expenses. Gonna pause. Everybody tracking, everybody on board with that?
Seems like it. What's some situations where cash flow negative would be acceptable?
So most businesses have kind of a cash reserve, right? And just because you're cash flow negative does not constitute a problem, as long as you're planning for it, right? So if you are a business, and I'm going to give you a nonprofit example, right? Some nonprofits, they've gravitated towards a model where they fundraise in the month of November. They do all of their fundraising. They have a big dinner that's $1,000 a plate. They get a bunch of people in, they raise $100,000, and that's their operating capital for the entire year. So they run cash flow negative for the rest of the year, but they're paying out of that money that they've already raised. So they may continue to incur, $5,000 of expenses in December, January, February, March, but they've already raised that money, and they know that, every November they have to raise $100,000, and they can disperse that cash throughout the year, right? And this is common in retail. So retail, you make all this money in November and December, but you don't spend it all, right? It has to go into some kind of cash holding account, and then it gets dispersed throughout the year to help you pay expenses. And that's where the forecasting comes right back in to say, okay, we raised, our revenue from the retail season in November and December was, say, $1 million, and our expenses for the year are $900,000, right? So you have to be very aggressive with that cash management all the rest of your year, knowing where that money's going to come from. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. It does. So on a long enough timeline, like years, you have to be cash flow positive. But month to month, for example, depending on your seasonality, depending on your industry, it could look a lot different. Olga's got some questions for you.
Okay. Here we go.
Here we go. Number one, what is considered as startup expenses? The numbers that you start your 3-year financial projection with.
So I would say no. I would say your startup expenses are the ones that you need, the money that you need, the expenditures that have to happen for you to start conducting business. So not continually into those years, right? So startup expenses are usually regarded as that which you need to begin doing what you're going to do for revenue, not the ongoing expenses of the first 3 years. So if you're going to manufacture and you need to buy a machine because you need to buy a printing press, for example, to do anything, then that's a startup expense, right? You're going to have to capitalize right away. But if it's like, hey, we're gonna open up this print shop and we're going to be contract printing for the first year, and then we're going to buy a print shop, that's not a startup expense. That's something you're going to fund through operations. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Olga?
She says yes.
Okay,
And
cool.
the
I'm one
second
for
part of
one.
this question is, second part of the question, how do you calculate cash on hand that's needed?
So go back to the budget, right? That's where you look at your budget. And if you're talking about from a startup standpoint, you're not going to know all those expenses, but you should have a budget that gives you the idea of this is how much cash I need on hand. If you have a bookkeeper or if you're using QuickBooks, some of those tools like QuickBooks or Wave or Xero have calculators and forecasters built into them. But you have to have a budget and have some understanding of what your expenses are, right? And cash on hand, it's going to be different for every business, and it's going to be different based on how you forecast it. So it's not like a yes or no answer, but I think if you've got a budget that is fairly accurate, you're going to know, have a pretty good idea how much cash you need to have on hand, right? Your bills will be known, your monthly expenses will be known. The variables are going to be things like buying inventory and all that stuff. So it's different for every business, but starts with a budget.
Wonderful. And let me just interject real quick. For anyone who is curious about getting started with QuickBooks, maybe you don't understand how to use it. It's a new program. I understand it can be a new program for you. It's been around for a long time. It's the most popular. We're offering a two-part series next month, QuickBooks 101 and QuickBooks 201 for free, that we're going to make available to you. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the program here. But make sure you sign up for those, because it'd be a great way to get an intro from a CPA who's going to talk you through how exactly to get started up with QuickBooks, if that's something that you need to do for your business.
Yeah.
So, commercial plug there.
No, it's important. I mean, this is one of those things where if you're not an expert accountant, if you're not an expert bookkeeper, you need to engage an expert, right? There's a lot to learn there, and part of your role now as a business owner, like you're on this seminar right now learning about it, like you need to understand it, but you don't have to be the best at it. You need to understand the implications, right? And an example of that understanding is the difference between cash flow, revenue, and profit, because there are three things that are different. And you can have revenue, you can have profit, but your business can still fail because you don't have cash. And that's the importance of this conversation, because cash is the money in and the money out. And if you can't pay bills because all your revenue is hanging out till November, your business will not be sustainable, and you're not going to be able to stay in business to get to November. So don't feel like you have to take this burden on to solve these problems all yourself, but you need to be aware of them, and you need to have the right people on your team, as it were, and that could be within your business or without your business. But you need to have those people who understand it and who are giving you the information you need to make informed and intelligent decisions, okay? And that's really the last part of this conversation today, that I want to encourage everybody to develop methodology around this, okay? Develop rigor, develop discipline, because these things are so important, right? We all saw the impact of last year to businesses. I'm sure everybody has their own story, or they know somebody who did really well or did really poorly, and the disparity between those two on some level is the ability to plan and react, right? So the first thing that I want to talk about is the process, right? And do not neglect the importance of planning. So if you're doing that exercise where every December you get together with your team and you plan out the budgets for next month, for next year, wonderful. So whatever that process that you have, make sure that it's there, and make sure you're dedicating enough time so that you have looked at an entire year's worth of stuff and you have a plan, whether that's something elementary that you just write on the back of a napkin, or something very robust on a business plan, using spreadsheets and that sort of thing. But you have to have it, and that's your baseline, right? And the plan hopefully has success written into it at the end of the year, but you need to know what success looks like for your business, right? That's your plan. And then as you go month to month, you'll know, because you have the plan in hand. You can say, yep, we are on track, everything is good. And if you're not, then changes need to be made, right? So you're evaluating, you're constantly looking at this. And I threw an example in here from the aviation community, and I guess the military too, but they have this concept of the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. And this is just a cognitive reminder that there's a rigorous process involved here, right? You have to see what's going on. You observe it, right? What's happening objectively? What were my sales numbers? What was my revenue? Did I have any cash this month? And then you orient yourself to that, right? And orienting means just kind of understanding what's happening, removing cognitive bias and taking a look at it and saying, okay, this happened. Maybe why did it happen? What do we know about it? How do we digest the reason that our sales were 10% below where they should be? Was it a bottleneck in production? Was it pent up, is it no demand? What's really going on here? And then once you've digested it, talked it over with your team, then you decide on a course of action, right? So do we need to increase our marketing? Maybe. Do we need to adjust our supply chain because we ran out of raw materials? Maybe, whatever those are. But then you decide, and then you act on that decision. So going right back to the top, then you observe next month. Okay, did the things that I did to change actually affect the change that I wanted? And if they did, awesome. And you keep doing this. It's iterative. It never ends. That's what being a business owner is all about, right? But the main concept doesn't change, which is have a plan that you're addressing all the time and that you're communicating with your team about. So I'm going to pause on that. It's a big concept. What questions do we have? Any comments?
Yeah, send them in, folks. I look at the OODA loop, and it's almost going back to what you said about having a methodology and having a rigor. Deciding how you're going to implement that OODA loop is important, whether that means that before you take an action, you'll meet with your key team, or you'll just, you'll observe and orient and just sit with a new piece of information for some amount of time before you decide and act, I think is really important. We live in an age where people skip the orient and decide, and then they go straight to act or even react.
Right.
That's not good. It very well could be a particular situation calls for no action. If you've got a good plan and here comes a new piece of information, you observe, you orient, and it does not seem to actually be important to your plan, so you decide to take no action. No action is sometimes a good idea if your plan is working and the piece of information that has arrived is a distraction from your mission and from what your plan is. So
yep. No, perfect call out. Orient is the step that really makes a difference, because your team is the group, and if you're a solo entrepreneur, you're responsible for all of these, but your team, at a business with employees, or maybe it's your professional team, your CPA or whoever, like they're right there with you in this orient phase, right? The more information you share with them, the better you're able to orient yourself to your surroundings, and the better a decision you can make as a business owner. And frankly, this is kind of where you're starting to synthesize all these new skills as a business owner, but the way you communicate with your team is very important here. So I put it on here as a call out for communication, because I've worked in organizations where every day there was a meeting to discuss these things, and that can be appropriate, but that can also be overwhelming to a team. And I've been in organizations where this is never talked about except for maybe once a quarter, right? So you'll meet as a team together to talk about what happened in the quarter, and life has moved so fast that your business is already in trouble and you're not there. So every one of you will have your own cadence, your own balance of communication where this is appropriate, but I encourage you to make it regular, stick with it, involve the right people, and share as much as possible. When you tell somebody, hey, our forecast, we need to sell 10 grand this year, or sorry, this month, right? That's our sales forecast. And it's week 2 and we've only sold $2,000. That's a problem. We're not going to make our forecast. What are we going to do about it? And involve as many people as you can where appropriate in those decisions, because that's how you can create alignment And that's how you can get your organization moving forward to solve problems for you and for your business, right? If you're holding all the cards so close to the vest that nobody has an idea of what success looks like, you may not succeed, right? Just being honest that these days people work for more things than just a paycheck, right? They want fulfillment and they want to see people succeed. So share what success looks like, right? Share that with your team. Let them be part of it. Define it for them. And I think you'll see magical things begin to happen. So I cannot stress team alignment enough here, and having the right people involved in these decisions and talking it through on a regular basis so everybody knows where they're at with the forecast, where they're at with the budget, and that's going to keep you safe, keep your cash flow coming the right, in the right amount to sustain your business, right? Okay, questions on that?
I'm looking. I think for an organization, for a small business who is not having regular team meetings, I don't know if you would agree with this or not, Adrian, but I think probably the target to shoot for would be weekly. Daily, maybe too much. Monthly, I think you're letting things get, not enough attention. But, you could start with weekly and then you could adjust from there. That seems to be a fairly successful strategy for a lot of our small business clients.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I can mentally see some people shaking their heads and thinking that they don't have time for this. And I would challenge that and say you don't have time not to do it, right? Think of the opportunity cost. I mean, your job as a business owner, it stops being about what the business is, and it starts being about you are an operator now, right? So if you're really, really good at making a particular item, great, make the item. If you want to have a business that makes the item, get good at running that business. And part of it is these types of things, right? You can't neglect it. And I think you may have all probably heard that quote, I want to work in my business versus on my business. And I think it's a very common, struggle for entrepreneurs, right? We all face that. And knowing is half the battle, as G.I. Joe would say. And the other half is just creating a discipline and a process around it and deciding that it's important to you. And, the rest will come, right? The beauty of this is if you have people on your team that understand these things better than you, that's experience you can leverage. It's a force multiplier. You can create processes or have, people help you create these processes that streamline things and move it forward. But if you're not communicating and you're not having a regular way of addressing it, then it'll never be what you want it to be. Unfortunately, there isn't anybody else who's going to come in and fix it for you. Yeah. So that's kind of, those are the topics I wanted to talk about. And like I said, making it valuable to everybody is having you guys bring stuff to the table here. So if you have something you want to talk about or you want to elaborate on forecasting, budgeting, cash flow, or methodologies, let's take some time and do that. Share some examples or share some questions you have.
Yeah, please do type them in. While we're waiting for those, I'll take one moment to do a quick commercial plug for some upcoming workshops. Ignore that top one. That's ongoing right now. If you did not join Essentials for Small Manufacturers and you're in manufacturing, then shame on you. But the bottom three are the ones that I'd really like to make sure that people know about. We have on April 20th a webinar on optimizing your website. This is going to be a 90-minute class, very in-depth, with a marketing consultant named Peter Brissett. And this will be brought to you by and sponsored by the City of Brighton and Brighton Economic Development. So we're very excited about that one. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have QuickBooks 101 and QuickBooks 201 coming up mid-May. And that's a two-part series. You can tune in for one or both of those. They're free. But on 11 May, we'll be sort of opening your account with QuickBooks and getting started with basics. And then 1 week later, on the 18th, we'll be diving into some more details. So you'll have a week there to sort of practice after the 101 and get real good at it for the 201. All right, Adrian, some questions are streaming in.
Okie dokie.
There we go. So turn off the screen sharing right there. Samantha wants to know, are there any estimates or guidelines for budgeting that you would recommend?
Estimates or guidelines? So estimates vary so much from business to business. The more info you have, the better on that. Guidelines, I suppose, hard to say. I like the monthly approach to budgeting, right? I like to know what is going to hit each month of business operations to the best of your ability. So some people will budget for a year and can manage that level of macro detail. But I think what's most beneficial to small business owners is really a monthly, imagery or a monthly capture of what your expenses are, because then you can do that rearward looking exercise where you can look at what you actually spent and compare it to your budget, and that provides the guideline moving forward, right? Like if you're consistently over budget, you've probably done an inadequate job of forecasting your expenses, right? So that's why you do it month to month to month, and that way you can match reality with what you thought it was going to be and affect a very quick, nimble change, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the main guideline I would offer you, is stick with a monthly budget and review it and make sure that you stuck to it. And if you didn't stick to it, understand why.
And I should mention that's something that a small business consultant can really help you with as well. If you are able to meet with someone who has some expertise in your particular industry, for example, we mentioned John Jaggers, who's a manufacturing expert. He might be able to take a look at your operating budget and say, hey,
Okay.
Your overhead in this area seems to be too high, or I would actually move some more funds into this area, something like this.
And sorry, Samantha, or John, you reminded me of something for you, Samantha. So in terms of percentages, there's a couple ways to start wrapping your head around what I think you might be asking, and that is if you need to have flex in your budget, right? If you need to have overage to cover an exceptionally expensive month or something like that, then maybe you're talking about having a cash account to cover these expenses. And so, when we're talking about personal finance, you may have heard, you should have 3 months of salary or something like that. And there's so many ways to think of that, but if you wanted to anchor around something, having 3 months of operating expenses might be a good thing to look at for your business, right? So if you have a cash reserve, that's 3 months of your operating expenses, that if there was no revenue coming in, you're still going to be solvent for 3 months, right? And you'll hear companies like Apple, they have huge cash reserves, and airlines have huge cash reserves where they can keep operating for years even without earning a single dime. And that's not going to be the situation for most of you guys, but having something in there that says, okay, do we want to be solvent for 3 months, 6 months, or a year? And some ways that you can start thinking about that are, if all of your sales stopped for some reason, how long would it take you to restart that sales pipeline, right? So if you're a manufacturer and your supply chain dries up and you have nothing to sell, how long is it going to take you to reestablish a supply chain? And that can be the guideline for how much cash you need to have laying around, okay?
Great answer. Okay, Desiree wants to know, she writes, cash flow discipline starts with knowing your numbers. Agree. I keep hearing plugs for Quickbooks. What experience do you have with Xero or Where? Maybe Wave. Is there really a difference between products?
Wave costs $0. I think is the main difference. Here's my advice there. So Xero and Wave are great. I think that they're more intuitive. I've worked with all three of these. I think that they're more intuitive than QuickBooks. However, QuickBooks is so ingrained in the industry. Almost every CPA uses it. Almost every bookkeeper is very familiar with it. And there's something to be said for having compatibility across different services, right? So if you're just a one-woman shop or a small shop and you feel comfortable with the Xero and Wave, like I've used both of those and they're great. Wave was my favorite of the two, because there's enough, like you can do quite a bit in their free tier, or at least up to a few years ago you could. So that's a good tool. And if you are comfortable with it and you understand it and it meets your needs, that's great. But you will have a tendency to outgrow that free aspect of it very quickly. So, when you're engaging with a bookkeeper, find a bookkeeper you like and find out what they use and see how you can integrate that, because sometimes there is cross compatibility there. So that would be my advice, is instead of maybe anchoring around what the product is, start with your own need, and then whoever's going to help you on your team, what do they need to use, and how concerned are you about cross compatibility? Yeah, but those are all good tools. The worst tool is the one you don't use.
Okay, here's one from Erica, and I can answer this. Can SBDC consultants help with creating a nonprofit? Yes, we can, and we're happy to. And so you can book a session just like you would if you were starting a small business, and we have some consultants that will help you with that. So northmetrosbdc.com, you can make an initial appointment there, and we're happy to work with you to create a nonprofit. We really think that's a wonderful thing to do. And stand by for some possible programming soon about funding your nonprofit as well. Look for maybe early May. You might see a webinar coming up pretty soon on that. A little teaser, Erica. Next question. Olga, do you also provide help with budgeting for SBIR Phase 2 review and advice? And this is a little specific, but yes, we can. Right now, the sort of regional expert for SBIR is at Boulder SBDC, but we're in communication with them. And if you don't know what SBIR is, then don't worry, this doesn't apply to you, but it's a specific SBA program to help with some technology startups. So yes, we can help, and our consultant, John Jaggers, is somewhat familiar with the SBIR, and we can certainly interface with the consultants over at Boulder SBDC to help with that. Desiree says, thanks about the wave. And Erica says, thank you so much. All right, well, thank you. We really appreciate these questions, and you're tuning in today. This has been a great session. And that's all the questions we've got here.
Okay, and don't feel like you can't ask. I think John's got my contact information. So if there's something that you just came into your mind, or you didn't feel comfortable talking about with the group, just give me a call. I've been doing this kind of thing for quite a while now, and I'm relatively familiar with both from a intimate standpoint in my own businesses, but just understanding it is daunting, but it's not impossible, and there's tons of help available out there. Don't be afraid to use it. So, and don't be afraid to feel like you have to know everything, because you don't. You really want to, in fact, be able to synthesize more than anything, right? There are expert bookkeepers out there who do it really well. Use them, right? There's CPAs who are really good at their jobs. Use them, and you stay focused on running your business, and don't get bogged down in the details that aren't gonna keep money coming in the door, okay? All right. Well, shoot, that's all Fantastic. I have.
All right. Well, to our audience, once again, thank you. You may see in your GoToWebinar control panel the ability to download the slides on a one-page handout from this presentation. And if you're having trouble with that, or you're on a phone, don't worry, I will email it to you as well. And I'll also be emailing the video of this presentation, as I mentioned. So once again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Adrian, thanks for coming on the show today. It's been really great. And we're always here. So once again, that final plug, northmetrosbdc.com. You can make an appointment and talk to Adrian or any of our consultants, and we'll be happy to help you work through some of these issues one-on-one, get you started on a good budget, help you implement some of these forecasting tools and these reviews with your team, so that you're paying attention and moving forward towards your SMART goals.
Awesome. Happy spring, everybody.